This country, Great Britain, was rebuilt by people who look just like me and my wife.
I'm never quite sure exactly what people mean when they say Britain was built by migrants. Do they mean migrants made a contribution to the post-war rebuilding of Britain, or do they mean migrants single-handedly built the country? One of those things is true, and it's not the one that this guy thinks. So let's just get this out of the way. Britain existed before 1947, all right? But the purpose of this video is not to discredit the genuine nurses, doctors, mill workers and so on who came to fill skill gaps in post-war Britain. If that's you, if that's anyone in your family, your hard work deserves recognition. Thank you. It made a difference. So I'm not just defining rebuilding as the rebuilding of the literal areas that were bombed by the Germans. My opinion is that rebuilding is a broader term that encompasses all of the efforts to convert Britain's economy from a wartime economy back into a peacetime economy and society. I asked ChatGPT what occupations and skill gaps were filled by migrant workers in the years following World War II, and it provided me with this list: public services, manufacturing and industry, construction and infrastructure, service and hospitality, and other sectors. I'll put a link to this conversation with ChatGPT underneath this video so you can check it out for yourself. You can click on all of the links and all the citations and read them firsthand. ChatGPT then asked me to create a table by sector, and I asked it to include the percentage of the workforce that Windrush workers filled, citing primary sources, okay? And this is the table that it gave me. So let's have a look. Public transport, London Transport, buses and underground. In a 1971 LT survey, LT, I presume, is the predecessor of TfL, Transport for London. 12% of LT's total workforce was classified as coloured, which was 7,500 of a 60,000 workforce, okay, 12%. NHS hospital doctors, this is a big one, okay. 31% of all doctors working in the NHS in 1971 were born and qualified overseas. Born and qualified overseas. So that doesn't include the overseas doctors who qualified in Britain. So it could be a bit more than that, actually. As for nurses, it says here that by 1977, 12% of student nurses and midwives were overseas recruits, 66% of whom were from the Caribbean. Post-war building booms created chronic labour demand. A 1962 ministerial statement to Parliament noted that in some areas, 50 to 80% of labour on house building generally, and civil engineering was immigrant labour. 50 to 80% in some areas includes Commonwealth, Irish and other migrants. My instinct there is that a good chunk of that will be Irish. Irish builders were ubiquitous, even in my lifetime, you know, in the 80s and 90s when I was growing up. It was very common to see Irish builders in Britain. So happy to be corrected on that. If anyone knows better than me, please leave a comment and put me right. Here's some sources for where ChatGPT got that data. Pause the video if you want to read it. You can always open up the chat yourself and have a look through if you want. Link down there. I then asked GPT to include all data for migrant workers from the Indian subcontinent as well as the Caribbean. And I asked it to make the same table as it did previously. Here's what we found. It's a bit of a struggle to get all this on the screen, but you can see here all the sectors. London Transport is the same as before. Doctors, okay, this goes into a bit more detail about the doctors, okay? These are all the different ranks of doctor. Senior registrar, junior hospital medical officer, senior house officer. These are all different ranks of doctor at that time, okay? So 46%, 41%, 59%, that's a fair old chunk, man. You can't argue with that. And there's some more important notes and context here, so pause if you want to read that. So now that context has been set, let's go back to the original TikTok video.
I will excuse you on that because it's not like us Muslims, Pakistanis, Bengalis, Indians are mentioned anywhere in your history books.
I think it's interesting that he's lumping himself in with all those other groups when it's pretty obvious they all fucking hate each other, right? Didn't Pakistan and India literally just have a war?
You wouldn't dare to teach your children that the train tracks, that the NHS, that the universities was built by bearded men and covered, modest, beautiful women.
Given what we just learned from official data, I think you're talking bollocks, mate.
But I will tell you one thing. 1947, your great country went to South Asia and recruited tens of thousands of men and women, and some of them against their will and brought...
Against their will? What, were they slaves? Were any workers brought from South Asia against their will to work in Britain in the post-war rebuilding period? ChatGPT thought for 59 seconds. Short answer, no.
Brought them back to Great Britain, where they rebuilt the NHS. By 1971, the NHS, 30% of the NHS, nurses and doctors, were men and women who were Muslim.
No, not true. Check the data. Bullshit.
During COVID, over 50% of the staff who passed away during COVID were Muslim, doctors and nurses.
That's an interesting claim. Let's look into that for a sec. Is there any truth in the claim that during the coronavirus pandemic, 50% of the NHS staff who died were Muslim doctors and nurses? There's a kernel of truth, but the specific claim isn't supported by official data. Seems like this guy's getting this from this claim here. A commonly cited figure about Muslims comes from the Muslim Doctors Association. They reported that over 50% of doctors who died in the first wave were Muslim. That was based on public identifications and memorials lists, not an official data set, and refers only to doctors in that early period, not to all NHS staff or to nurses. It seems like actually the largest share of deaths among nurses were Filipino nurses, who made up 22% of nurse COVID deaths. Fucking hell. Filipinos, of course, are Christian, Catholic Christian, so they're not Muslims. There are some Muslims, I believe, in the Philippines, but they're a minority. So here's the bottom line. It's accurate that Muslim doctors were tragically overrepresented among early doctor deaths, but there's no evidence that half of all NHS staff who died were Muslim. So just to get a rough idea for some kind of conclusion, I asked ChatGPT what percentage of the workforce in the UK was either foreign-born or second-generation immigrant in 1971. The reason I've chosen 1971 is when they brought in the Immigration Act 1971, which tightened things up a bit. But here it says in 1971, roughly 6 to 6.5% of the England and Wales UK population was foreign-born, okay? Many second generation in 1971 were children, okay, so they hadn't yet entered the workforce. 6%. You can look at this in terms of pure data, pure percentages, and you can look at this in terms of actual contributions, right? A doctor, a nurse, saving someone's life is a extremely valuable contribution, okay? We should be grateful for that. But did migrants build Britain? Well, I think it's safe to say no. And in fact, it was mostly built by people who look like me.